Hey everyone, and welcome to my new tutorial. In today's tutorial, we are going to create this stinger transition for your live streams, or you can use it as a normal transition for your videos. Before we continue, I want to mention that you can access the project files of this tutorial and every other on my Patreon page. This type of tutorial fits under the second tier membership. And without further ado, let's go. Here we are inside of Adobe After Effects. First thing we're going to do is create a new composition. I'm going to name this transition. I'm going to leave it at 1920 by 1080, and in this case I'm going to leave it at 60 frames per second. You should adjust the frame rate to the frame rate of your live stream or the video you're going to use this transition on. For example, if your stream is at 30 fps, you should make this transition 30 fps as well. And we're going to leave the duration at 5 seconds. This transition is not going to be 5 seconds, but just so we have enough space to work with. And I'm going to hit OK. So here's our composition. Now what we're going to do next is create some guides, so they can help us to create these shapes that we need. I'm going to hit Ctrl R on my keyboard to open the ruler. I'm going to zoom to the left corner on top, like so, and then I'm simply gonna drag one guide here and then one guide here. I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom right corner. I'm gonna zoom in just to be precise. I'm going to drag one here and then one here, like so. We can fit this up to 100. The next thing we're gonna do is open the proportional grid just so we can see the midline right here. So I'm going to drag one guide there, like so. I'm going to zoom in just to make sure it's in the middle. Then I can zoom out again, and I'm going to open the normal grid to see where we're going to place the other two lines. So let's say I'm going to use 2 blocks from the center here and 2 blocks from the center here. So I'm going to drag one guide on this line, like so. I can zoom in just to make sure I'm doing it correctly. And then the second one is going to be on this side, on this line. You can see how it's going to be proportional. I'm going to fit this up to 100. I'm going to disable the proportional grid and the grid, and I'm going to hit Ctrl R to hide the rulers. Now the next thing we're going to do is go to View and make sure Snap to Guides is checked, so we can snap our points that we're going to create to guides. I'm going to click this, then I'm going to select the pen tool. I'm going to create one point here. It doesn't matter where you create it. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to snap it into the bottom left corner. You see how it snaps. Now I'm going to create the second point, let's say here. I'm going to select it and snap it here into the cross. Then I'm going to create the third one and the fourth one, like so. Now we can enable the stroke for this. I'm going to stroke, I'm going to enable it, solid color, and I'm going to leave it at 6 pixels. And this is going to be our line layer. I'm going to select the layer, hit enter, and rename it to line. Now the next thing we're going to do is duplicate this layer by hitting Ctrl D on our keyboard. I'm going to name this bottom shape, like so. Now I'm going to place the line above this, and I'm going to lock the line because we don't have to do anything with the line right now. Now when I click on the bottom shape, it's basically the same line that we have. So I'm going to zoom in on this point. I'm going to select the point, make sure the pen tool is selected. I'm going to click on the point, and then I'm going to create another point, let's say here, like so. I'm going to snap it onto the guide that we have. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to create another point, let's say here, and then I'm holding down Shift. I'm going to create another point here, and then another point here on this guide. If it doesn't snap instantly, you can just click on it and drag it up. And then I'm going to close this shape by clicking on our first point, like so. This is going to be our shape. Now I can fit this back up to 100. I can actually hit Ctrl and semicolon on my keyboard to hide the guides, or you can go to the view and disable the show guides. Now I'm going to select this shape. I'm going to disable the stroke because we don't need stroke on this shape. And I'm going to enable the fill, solid color. This is the color we're going to be working with. Now I'm going to select my selection tool because I don't need the pen tool anymore for now. What I can do next is go to my bottom shape, Control D on my keyboard to duplicate it. I'm going to hit enter to rename it. I'm going to call it top shape. I'm going to right click here, go to the transform, and I can simply flip this horizontal, and then I can right click again, transform, and flip vertical, like so. Now let me show you why we need the extra parts outside of the comp on this shape. I'm going to hide the line layer, and then I'm going to zoom in, like so, and then you can see how these shapes connect, and then we still have some space between them. This is easily noticeable. We can easily adjust this by moving one shape towards the other, but in our case, bottom shape would be wiser because it's below the top shape. So I'm going to select the bottom shape. I'm going to hit P on my keyboard to open the position property, and I'm simply going to move this down by 1, and then this down by 1 as well, like so. Now we can fit this back up to 100. We can close the position property from now. We can show the line, and we can unlock the line as well. By the way, if you see the outlines of these layers, you can hit Ctrl-Shift-H on your keyboard to hide them, like so, if they are annoying you or anything. But every time you select the layer, for example line, you will not see the selection box. So you can enable it again by Ctrl-Shift-H, like so. So now we don't really need the bottom and the top shape, so I'm going to disable them, like so. We're just going to focus on the line. I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to go add and add trim paths, like so. I'm going to expand trim paths, and now we are ready to animate. I'm going to drag the end all the way to 0, like so, and we're going to put the start on 100% because we need to animate the start. Our line is coming from the bottom left corner, as you can see. So I'm going to hold down Ctrl-Shift and press the right arrow 4 times to go, let's say, 40 frames ahead. And this is where my ending keyframe will be. I'm going to hit the stopwatch to create the keyframe. I'm going to drag the time indicator back to 0, and then I'm going to put this all the way to 0. Now we can see our line is being animated. It's just a linear animation. Now I'm going to position my time indicator on this keyframe, and let's say I'm going to move around 25 frames ahead. And this is where I'm going to create my first end keyframe. And then let's say this is going to be 50 frames long, so I'm going to go 50 frames ahead. Then I'm going to drag the end all the way to 100. So now if we replay this, we get something like that. Now we are going to position our time indicator back at 0. We can select the line layer and hit U on our keyboard to just show these keyframed attributes. Now we can enable the top shape, and we can animate this. It's basically going to be position. So I'm going to hit P on my keyboard to open the position property. And let's say this is going to last a second and maybe 20 frames. So I'm going to move ahead to 1 second and 20 frames, or 80 frames, as you can see here. This is where I'm going to create my first keyframe by hitting the stopwatch. And then I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-H to see my outlines. And I'm going to drag this outside of my comp, like so. And I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom shape. So I'm going to reveal it, click on it, hit P on my keyboard to open the position property, go to about 80 frames, create my first keyframe, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to drag this the same way I did with the other one, like so. Now I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-H again so I don't see the outlines. I'm going to fit this back up to 100, and I'm going to preview what I have. Now we don't want our shapes coming together with the line, so I'm going to offset the top shape, let's say 15 frames. So I'm going to move 15 frames ahead. I'm going to use my opening square bracket key on the keyboard to position the start of this layer at the time indicator. like so. And now let's say I'm going to offset the bottom shape, let's say 15 frames ahead as well, so that would be at 30, like so. You can even drag this if you don't want to use the opening square bracket. You can hold down Shift so it snaps to the time indicator, like so. I'm going to select the first two keyframes here, hit F9 on my keyboard to easy ease them. I'm going to go to the graph editor. I'm gonna hold on Alt and zoom in a little bit, like so. I'm gonna right click here, make sure the edit speed graph is selected. Then I'm going to select the left keyframe and drag the handle all the way to the right. I'm going to leave the influence at 100%. I'm going to close the graph editor, zoom out this a little bit. I'm going to select these two keyframes, F9 to easy ease them, go to the graph editor, zoom in a little bit, make sure the edit speed graph is selected, and I think I'm going to do the same thing, like so. And then I'm going to close this, and we can preview our line being animated. I can actually hide these two to focus only on the line. That's looking great in my opinion. Now we can enable these two, and we're going to do the similar thing. So I'm going to select these two keyframes, F9 to easy ease them, go to the graph editor, and I think I'm going to make this a bit snappy, so I'm going to select the right keyframe. I'm going to drag this all the way to the left, and I'm going to select this handle and drag it all the way to the right while holding down Shift, like so. And I'm going to go to the bottom two keyframes, F9 to easy ease them, go to the graph editor, right click, edit speed graph selected, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now we can play this and see what we have. That's looking great already. Now we need to animate both of these shapes going out. So let's say I'm going to position myself here at this top part on this keyframe, and I'm going to move, let's say, around 30 frames ahead, like so. I'm going to select both of these keyframes, Control C to copy them, and then Control V to paste them. I'm going to right click them, keyframe assistant and time reverse keyframes, like so. And I can do the same with the bottom ones. Control C to copy and Control V to paste, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes. Alright, that's looking great. Now I'm gonna Control A to select all of these layers, and I'm going to hit U on my keyboard to minimize them. Now I'm gonna enable the motion blur for all of them, like so. I'm gonna make sure that motion blur is enabled here. Now we have to add the shape above this one with the different color that's coming in, as we saw in the preview. So I'm going to select these two layers, top shape and the bottom one. I'm gonna hit Control Shift C on my keyboard to pre-compose them. I'm gonna call this shapes. I'm gonna select the move all attributes into the new composition and adjust composition duration to the time span of the selected layers. I'm gonna hit OK. Now I'm gonna hit Control D to duplicate this. I'm gonna rename it to, let's say, lighter shapes. The next thing I'm gonna do is go to the effects and presets window. If you don't see this window, you can enable it here under the window tab and go to the effects and presets. Now I'm gonna type in fill. I'm gonna look for the fill effect. I'm gonna drag the fill effect over this layer. And now I'm gonna change the color of this to some lighter blue. I have the code, I'm just gonna paste it and hit OK. And now I'm gonna offset this, let's say 10 frames ahead, like so, and we can play and preview what we have. We can offset this a little bit more, let's say five more frames. It's gonna come here at 30, just like so. Now we can see where this comp ends, let's say around here. I'm gonna press N on my keyboard to trim the work area to this place. The next thing we're gonna do is insert the logo. So I'm gonna click here to go to my project, and I'm gonna find my picture, place it in, and I'm gonna place it, let's say, above these shapes and below the line. The first thing I'm gonna do is hit Ctrl-Shift-Z while this layer is selected to pre-compose it. I'm gonna name this logo comp. So we're gonna apply the animations on this comp instead of the raw picture itself. So for example, if you need to change the logo, you can enter this comp and put any other image that you want. I'm gonna place my time indicator around here to see if this logo is a bit huge. Yep, it is. I'm gonna select the layer, hit S on my keyboard to open the scale property, and I'm gonna size this down to, let's say, 70% looks good. I'm gonna leave it at 70. Now I'm gonna minimize this by hitting S on my keyboard again. Now we need to make the logo reveal happen. So we're going to select the lighter shapes. I'm gonna hit Ctrl D on my keyboard to duplicate it. I'm gonna hit Enter to rename it. I'm gonna call this matte shapes, M shapes, like so. I'm going to place this above the logo comp, and then I'm going to select the track matte of the logo comp. By the way, if you don't see the track matte here, you can right click here, columns, and make sure the modes is enabled. And I'm gonna place it on alpha matte, like so. So when these lighter shapes come in, the logo is going to reveal itself. Now we can preview this. Now we saw that the logo looks a bit static, so we're going to animate the logo a little bit. Let's say it's gonna zoom in. So I'm gonna go around 1 second. I'm gonna click on the logo comp, hit S on my keyboard to open the scale property. That's when I'm gonna create my first keyframe. And then I'm gonna move to, let's say here, let's say 315, where the animation ends. I'm gonna put this to, let's say, 82%. Like so. We can select both of these keyframes, F9 to ease them, and we can preview what we have. Now we can hit S on our keyboard again to minimize that. We actually have to make sure to enable the motion blur again on all the comps that we want to have motion blur on. So now we need to add the glow on our line. I'm actually going to hide all of these layers, and I'm just gonna play with the line right now. I'm gonna position my time indicator here on the position where I see the whole line. I'm gonna select the line. Actually, I'm going to Ctrl-Shift-C to pre-comp it, and I'm gonna call this line comp. And I'm going to go to our effects and presets, and I'm gonna look for glow. Now, while this layer is selected, I'm going to hit double click on the glow to apply it. So we can play around with this. I can actually select this and Ctrl D to duplicate it, and then we can play around the glow intensity, let's say 0.5, and the radius, let's say around 55. We can lower the threshold to, let's say, 45%. Now let's say we want to make it a little bit stronger and add some other color to it. We can actually select the line comp, Ctrl D to duplicate it, go to the bottom one, and then we can add the fill effect over this, like so. Double click it. I'm gonna make sure to position the fill below the glow components here, and then I'm going to change this to, let's say, our blue that we had, like so. We can make this more intense, like maybe 1. Then we can go to the line comp 1, and then we can actually make it a bit less. 0.2 radius, maybe 45. Now, if we enable these layers as well, I hope my PC doesn't die because this is on full and it's 60 frames per second, so we can preview this. Okay, that's looking great. If you want to make this a bit stronger, if you don't see it, you can always tweak things a little bit. Let's say around here, we can even add another one by duplicating this. The threshold, let's say 55 on this one, and then we're gonna make the radius around 75, like so. Intensity maybe 2. No, actually we will leave the intensity on 1. Also, we can go to the project. I'm going to enable the transparency here. Go back to this point, and I'm going to hold Alt and make the color depth 16 bits per channel. That way our glow is kind of stronger. You're gonna see what I mean. If I click here, maybe you don't notice it here, but look, if I put 32, it's like super strong. So we're gonna leave it on, let's say, 16. You should do this at the end of everything because it's really heavy on the PC. So while you're working, you can leave it on 8, and when you're about to render, you can put it on 16. So I'm gonna leave it on on 8 right now. Try to preview it. That's how it looks when the background is transparent. I'm going to disable the motion blur from now, and then I'm just gonna add the final touch to this. So I'm gonna select the lighter shapes. I'm gonna look for the drop shadow here. I'm gonna double click it, and let's say I'm gonna make this 40%. This looks good. Distance, let's say 40, and then I'm gonna make the softness, let's say about 500. And then for the bottom shape, if we see here, it's not that strong because it's facing this direction. So I'm gonna duplicate this drop shadow, and I'm gonna make it face, let's say minus 35. It's gonna go towards this direction, and we can see here it's added. And now if we scrub through this, we can see how it looks on the transparent grid. I think it's looking great. One more thing, make sure to enable the motion blur on the line comps as well. And this is the animation that we have. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.